So today we're going to play a 2-5-1 in the key of C major, okay? And this is made by 3 chords. The 2, the D minor 7, 5, the G7, and 1, the C major 7, okay? I'm only playing shell voicings, so there are no fifths, only root, third and seventh, only the important notes of these chords, okay? We're gonna start from here, and we're gonna transform it. We're gonna make it like this. Alright? Did you already spot what happened? I didn't play the G7 anymore, and I replaced it with another chord. Now that chord was D flat 7, okay? Now, why have I done this? Because I want to talk about tritone substitutions. Now, I talked about tritone substitutions already. I talked about them in my Music Theory for Guitarists series, which is a free series here on YouTube made by 20 live streaming lessons that you can find in a playlist in the description below. But today's lesson, today's video is about a new series where we break down one single concept, one single music theory subject into a proper lesson only on that. And because my latest music theory lesson was about secondary dominants, which by the way, if you haven't watched yet, I'm gonna put a link in the description below as well, I thought it made sense if we now continue with tritone substitutions, because at the end of the day, we're still talking about chord substitutions. Now, before we get started explaining these tritone substitutions, if you guys want me to break down other music theory subjects into a proper lesson here on the channel, please let me know that in the comments below and I will make a lesson on the topics that you suggest. Now, like we said, we were starting from a 2-5-1 in C major, right? And we were only using the shell voicings. This for the D minor 7, this for the G7, and this for the C major 7. Now we will focus our attention on the G7, on the 5-7, which has the dominant function, the tension that we want to create, and that we then release when we play the C major 7, the 1. Now the tritone substitution only applies to dominant 7 chords. So you can't take the D minor 7 or the C major 7 or any other chord which is not a dominant 7th and replace it with another chord and thinking that you are doing a tritone substitution if you just use a chord which is a tritone apart. It doesn't work like that. The tritone substitution only works between dominant 7 chords. So you have to get a dominant 7 chord like G7 and replace it with another dominant 7 chord. But this dominant 7 chord must be a tritone apart. A tritone means 3 tones. So if I count 3 tones from G, I get 1 tone to A, 2 tones to B, and 1 more tone to C sharp or D flat. So D flat will be the tritone of G. Okay, this interval is called a tritone, okay, because the notes are 3 tones apart, okay. And we should also mention that this interval divides the octave into equal halves. What does that mean is that if I go from G to another G, this is going to be 1 octave. 1 octave is 6 tones. So if I go 3 tones up or 3 tones down, that's exactly the same thing because I'm just dividing the octave into equal parts. From G to D flat or from D flat to G, there is exactly the same distance. Now, why can we take a dominant 7 chord like this one, G7, and replace it with another dominant 7 chord like D flat 7 effectively? Well, in order to really understand this, we should be looking at the notes within these 2 chords, okay? Now, when I play the shell voicing of this, okay, I'm playing G, F, and B. Well, let's actually spell it correctly, G, B, and F, because I'm looking at the root, the major 3rd, and the minor 7th, okay? As you know, I'm not using the 5th because I'm only using a shell voicing, okay? Now, if I look at the D flat 7, I'm playing D flat, F, and B. So obviously the B should be called C flat enharmonically, but that's exactly the same note. And this again is root, major 3rd, and minor 7th, okay? So what we can spot already is that there are 2 notes in common. These 2 notes. Now, these 2 notes, by the way, are 1 tritone apart as well, and they are F and B. And that is the secret why the dominant 7 chords really create the tension. It's because they contain a tritone interval within themselves, okay? And it's the tritone between the major 3rd and the minor 7th of a chord. Now, if you play a G dominant 7, you have that interval between the notes B and F. And if you play a D flat dominant 7, you still have the same tritone interval between the notes F and B again, or C flat, which is the same. So that is the first reason why you can actually take a dominant 7 chord and replace it in a chord progression with a dominant 7 chord a tritone apart. You can either replace that, like in our example, when I was playing the 2-5-1, I wasn't playing the G7 anymore because I was playing the D flat 7, or you can play them both within the same bar, like. That also works and it's pretty nice, I believe. But now, in order to understand even more how close these two chords are, G7 and D flat 7, let's consider that rather than starting from a G7, I'm starting from a G7 flat 5. This chord here. What I'm doing really, I'm taking the fifth of the chord, which is D, and I'm flattening it down to D flat, and what I get is effectively a G7 flat 5, which is a chord which is an altered dominant 7 chord, a chord that you can always play if you're into jazz or R&B chord progression. Now, if we spell the notes that we get in a G7 flat 5, we get G, F, B, D flat, or if we spell them in the right order, G root, B major third, D flat, flat 5, diminished fifth, and then F minus 7th. Now, if we compare the G7 flat 5 with the equivalent chord in D flat 7, so the D flat 7 flat 5, I will find the flat 5 of the D flat here. That's going to be a G, okay? Now, I could play it here, but it's quite uncomfortable, and I need to include either the major ninth or the minor ninth to play it here in this position, so starting from the shelf voicing. So I'm just going to show you that D flat 7 with the same position as the G7 flat 5. So I'm gonna move the root from G to D flat and get the same chord here. That's literally the same position, right? Now, we already spelled these notes G, F, B, and D flat. If I spell the notes here, I'm gonna get exactly the same notes, because this is gonna be D flat, B, or C flat, which is exactly the same, F, and G. Okay, so they are in another order, but they are exactly the same notes. Okay, and again, I can spell them in the right order as D flat being my root, then I can go to F being my major third, then I can go to G, which should be called A double flat enharmonically, but that's exactly the same note. That's the flat 5, diminished fifth, and then the note B, which should be called C flat, and that is the minus 7. So we've just demonstrated that whether you play a G7 flat 5 or you play D flat 7 flat 5, you're actually playing the same chord, exactly the same chord, involving exactly the same notes. You could almost consider that the D flat 7 flat 5 is a second inversion of a G7 flat 5. Okay, and vice versa, of course. So that's another reason why you can definitely compare these two chords. You will keep the same function, the dominant function, and you will probably just add a little bit more of tension. It is the same thing as playing a G7 and adding the flat 5, one more tension, okay? But if you don't want to compare these chords with the flat 5, you can compare them using other kind of alterations or extensions, for instance. One that I like to see very often is that, you know, because in jazz we play a lot the G7, the dominant 7 chord with the sharp 5. It's one of our favorite, you know, alterations, and you find them a lot even in neo-soul guitar. If I now replace the G with a D flat and I play the same 3 notes that I play in a G7 sharp 5, I'm actually getting just a classic D flat 7 with the 9th, so a D flat 9, okay? So I could play something like this D minor 9, D flat 9 as a replacement of the G7 sharp 5, and then maybe a C major 9, why not? So this only demonstrates that you can even extend the D flat 7 that you get, and at the end of the day it's the same thing as looking at a G7 sharp 5 flat 5 as well, okay? So hopefully, guys, this makes sense. What you have to do next is taking another chord progression which involves a dominant 7 chord and try to replace that dominant 7 chord with another dominant 7 chord a tritone apart. There is a simple trick on guitar that you can use. If the root of the chord that you're starting from is on the E string, you will always find the tritone on the string below 1 fret across, like this. And equally, if you go the other way around, if your root is on the A string and you want to find your tritone on the string above, you just go to the string above, 1 fret back, and you find your tritone. So it's going to be really straightforward to find on the neck of the guitar. Guys, let me know in the comments what other music theory subjects you want me to break down in the next videos. And if you want to support this channel, think about becoming a patron. You can visit my Patreon page at the link in the description below and find out about the rewards that I offer on my Patreon page. Thanks guys for watching. Have a great day.